Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Possible and Likely podcast. Last episode, we discussed foster care and respite and some ways for our listeners to get involved during foster care. Today, we'll be diving into what happens after foster care, namely through adoption and aging out. And our guests for our first conversation on adoption are Mike and Karen Schroder. They are leaders in Daybreak Church's foster care ministry and have themselves adopted and welcomed a child into their home. From when I've known them and limited conversations I've had with them in pre-production calls for this podcast, I've known them to be deeply kind and compassionate people, and it's just an honor to have you guys on the show and to talk about your family's experience with adoption. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and just to dive in, I've known you all for a little while, and I know some of your story, but can you share with our listeners and viewers, mostly probably just my mom and Nate's mom, who are watching, if you could tell us more about your family's story with adoption, like how'd you get involved in foster care and adoption, and what has this journey been like for you?
I can start. We both have adoption in our families growing up. So my cousins have been adopted internationally from Korea. So adoption was just something that we didn't think anything strange about. It was just something that we grew up with. And Mike has a little bit more with that.
My family growing up, my parents decided when I was about 10 years old that we were gonna be a foster family. And so pretty much from the time I was about 10 until I was off into college and out into the real world, my family had lots of kids that were coming in and out of our home that we were fostering either temporarily or also ones that were eventually adopted by my family. And so I have 6 adopted siblings, all that were adopted through foster care. And so growing up, it was something that was just, kind of a part of our lives. And so, it was just something that I definitely learned a lot from, and then was able to kind of apply to our lives now that we are adults. So.
Yeah. And even when we got married, we talked about, if we couldn't have kids, adoption was something that we would pursue. We were able to have 2 biological boys. But I remember I had a lot of problems during our second pregnancy, and it was something where we thought we're done biologically. Mm-hmm. And we kind of just thought that was it. But then we kind of revisited the adoption, and we were like, is that it? What's God telling us? We're not really sure. Mm-hmm. And we were like, maybe we should find out more information. And we knew there were different ways to adopt. There's internationally, domestic, from birth, or foster care. And we really didn't know what would fit our family best. And so we kind of explored the different options. Do you remember?
Yeah, we spent a lot of different time, just trying to learn as much as we could. So we, talked to a lot of different families and friends of ours that had, either adopted it, domestically or been a part of the foster care system. And we, went to different conferences and information sessions just to find out just as much information as we could to help us to make sure we were understanding what we were getting into and making sure that we kind of had as much information as possible. So.
Yeah, I remember at the time I wasn't working, so I was already at home. It didn't really seem to make sense to adopt internationally or, where it would cost a lot of money and then I'd have to go back to work to earn the money to then stay back at home. I remember that I was a little apprehensive about foster care, and just because I wasn't sure. I knew there's a lot of trauma involved, and I wasn't sure what that would mean. So we did spend a lot of time praying about it. We met with Cindy King. She advised us to have prayer partners, and that was something that was really helpful to us, even just as we were exploring, and we could kind of update them every couple months with what we were processing and ask them to pray with us. And then I remember going to, I think it was her training, it was Victoria's Hope
Yep.
Consulting, and they had somebody there that was talking about how there's this big long waiting list for an infant, and because some people like have never experienced birth and all of that, but there's a real need for someone in the moment in foster care. And I remember thinking, we can do that. We have 2 boys at home, and if somebody needs us right now, maybe God's calling us to do that right now. And so that really kind of solidified, as well as, I was worried about, different issues that might come up. And at the time, some of Mike's family was having issues, but it was biological family issues. And it just kind of solidified the other thought that, I'm not in control of my biological kids either. Why would I be in control of any of this? It's God controlling all of our children. So it's not in my control. So I think that kind of hit at the same time. Mike, you were pretty much open to anything, I think, because you already had that foster care experience.
Yeah,
I don't know if you
it was something that I was familiar with, and so I think because of that, like I think knowing kind of what we went through as a family growing up, it was something that I felt like we would be able to handle, the 2 of us as well. And so I think, going forward, we, after all of that, finding out information and God leading us to, possibly become foster parents, that's when we decided that's, where we're going to pursue. And so after that, we decided on what agency we were going to work with, and kind of started the training pretty soon right after that. So,
and that was based too on some of the families we had talked to in our church. There were a lot that were using the same agency, and that was helpful to be able to talk with those same families. And I remember you 2 were like excited to have a church family to support you, because you said growing up that wasn't quite the same.
Yeah, it wasn't something that I was, our church growing up like knew that we were foster parents, and knew, that we had kids that would come to church with us and stuff that were foster children. But I would say I never really felt like supported by the church. They didn't really kind of make it a point to like maybe explain to other people what we were doing, or like why it was important, or why it was important to help support someone who is involved in helping children through foster care and things like that. So that was something that I was excited to kind of pursue as well, which is kind of what led us to get into like the ministry aspect of things at Daybreak too. So
yeah, it felt different because we had our prayer partners that we had at the very beginning, and then our families that we identified at church that could also help support us. And that was really important for us along our whole journey.
Yep.
That's great. Yeah, and I think just for our listeners and our viewers, I just want to make a distinction for us as we're understanding adoption. We're specifically looking at adoption out of foster care, which is in their case what happened. But that's not discounting or minimizing the value of other forms of adoption or other methods. But that's just not the point of this podcast and in this exploration. But we certainly affirm and value those who are choosing to pursue adoption in other ways. But we just are focusing on this one just as we go forward. But we are so thankful that you've joined us, and that's really helpful. Were there anything in particular that you would point to that were helpful in making the decision to adopt? So you have your prayer team that was probably helpful. A similar agency was helpful, and then your Daybreak community being helpful. Are there anything else that was helpful?
I mean, I think we did go to, what was it, the Northeast Adoption and Foster Care training at LCBC. And that was really helpful because it just had,
I went to that.
It had just so many opportunities to learn more, because I felt like I wasn't at the same point that Mike was, where they had breakout sessions, they had opportunities to learn and ask questions. And LCBC also had a panel one night that was for specifically to like clarify between all the different types of adoption.
Got it.
And then we could kind of learn a little bit more about each type because we also didn't really know where we were going to land at the time. So it just helped having all of those differences clarified and being able to ask questions. So I do feel like both of those were important early in our journey too.
And then I think once we were pretty certain that we wanted to be foster parents, I think one thing that was really helpful to us was learning more about trauma. I mean, we learned, we went to some conferences. We went to Empowered to Connect conference, which was here at West Shore. It's now called Hope for the Journey, where we would learn about like trauma-informed care and basically, ways that we could possibly help kids who might have experienced trauma. And so I think that like going into learning that like kind of ahead of time, I think really made us feel more comfortable once we were, finishing up our foster care training and possibly getting a placement. So,
and I know I joined a group of girls that met pretty much, what was it, like once a month? And they were already on the journey of foster care, and I hadn't started yet. We, it was after we had gotten approved, but we hadn't gotten placed with anyone yet. And so that was really helpful to hear their real life experiences and to be able to ask questions and kind of see like, oh, maybe I should learn more about this to get ready if that would happen to us, and that was really helpful too, because as soon as we just started to pursue it, we were able to join in on that. And I think they even you did some things with the guys too. They had the guys get together every once in a while too.
Yep.
So
Was that the Dairy Queen group?
Yeah.
Oh man, I used to hear about these women getting together at Dairy Queen, and I was like, whoa, come on, I love Dairy Queen, but they didn't invite me.
I did bring home a Blizzard for Mike every once in a while.
Oh yeah, my wife didn't go to those, so I never got the Blizzard. But people, when I asked her to say, you could just go to Dairy Queen. You don't need to interrupt our female fun. And I was like, oh, I like kids and Dairy Queen, but they didn't invite me, which is totally fine. I'm clearly over it. Wait, was that the Dairy Queen group? Like I knew. Yeah, that's great. And I just want to highlight before Nate asks the next question. I think that Mike, we're just alluding there to guys getting together. I think guys and gals getting together to talk about where you are in the journey and in the process is so helpful and so needed. And particularly for guys, where we've talked about this a lot throughout the podcast, that 7 out of 10 women who want to do foster care don't because their husbands are against it. And sometimes that reservation that husbands have in this process is so good, and the breaks are helpful to get perspective and view, are we ready, or what do we need to do, and are we emotionally healthy? Those are all good. But I do think that men being in close proximity to other men going through a very unique journey, it is very valuable, just emotionally and to connect. It's good. And so guys, if you're ever invited to hang out with another guy, say yes, because it's good. And you might feel like you can't do that, but it's really important to do that, and not just keep going, because keep going when you need a break is generally a recipe for a disaster. That's what I've seen. And so thanks for giving me the opportunity to plug guys hanging out. So Nate, what do you got?
Yeah. So what have you learned since adopting Levi into your family? What all is needed to care for an adopted child, and what do your biological children need as well after adoption? You can take those one at a time if you want.
Do you want to start with that?
Well, so Levi was our first placement in foster care. And so I know that it doesn't always happen that way where you end up adopting your first placement. But for him, he came to live with us as a foster placement when he was 1 week old. And so,
And we did not know at the time whether it would be we had no idea if it was going to be permanent or not. They kind of knew our preference, but that's something they can never guarantee. So it's just, based on what they think could happen. But again, we didn't know for the first year at least which way it was leaning.
yep. But we ended up being able to adopt Levi when he was about 19 months old. And so he just turned 4 yesterday. So, he's been with us in our family since he was a week old, but he's been a permanently part of our family is when we adopted him for the past 2.5 years. He's been adopted. So I think, some of the things that we've definitely learned is the whole time we were going through the process, foster care, and even after he's been adopted, is just the value of having support. We are so blessed with just being able to have, 2 very supportive families, a lot of friends, close friends that have been there as prayer partners and people who would be willing to, just provide anything that we would need, provide meals for us if we were, really
Childcare.
busy, childcare if we would need it for our older kids, if we were having to go to, court hearings or visits or anything like that. And so, and then also just the value of having, like a small group who was always there for us that we could, share our experiences with,
Emotional support.
and giving
Yeah.
us emotional support through the whole process. And so, and, just seeing all that support that we had kind of through everything and just contrasting that with just the lack of support that we noticed with Levi's biological parents when they were going through, the whole process while he was in foster care, and just feeling, just really blessed and, knowing that, we couldn't do what we were called to do without having that support, and just knowing how difficult it must have been for his parents when, they were going through everything that they were going through, with him being in foster care and just not having that support.
Right. And
So,
for our biological children, like during foster care, they needed to know that we were all helpers. So we would explain we didn't want to show Levi's parents in a negative light, and we know everybody needs help sometimes. So it was the perfect word for us to use at the ages they were. I think they were 4 and 6 at the time, roughly. So we just said we will help this family with taking care of Levi for as long as they need help. It might be a few days, it might be forever, we're not sure. And they just were able to then come on board, and they wanted to be helpers. So I felt like we were all in it together. We had like a picture in our house at the time that had 4 birds on it. And we said, when we know what will happen with Levi, we can paint him in the picture. He might be a bird that came to live with us permanently, and we can put him on the branch, or he might fly away back home, and we just don't know yet. But when we know, we can put him in the picture. And I think that was good closure for them.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
And they could just know that we were going to do that. And when it was time, they helped paint him on the branch. So that was really
awesome.
Yeah.
Come on.
yeah,
That's so cool. But he's still a bird, like
Yeah.
whether he stays or goes.
Right.
Yeah.
He's still a bird that we can love and
Yep.
appreciate. That's really helpful.
Yeah, so they really, and then I remember one time at bedtime, I think it was our younger son, just asked, like, Mommy and Daddy, what will that ever happen to me? Will I be taken to, and, have to live at someone else's house, like that? And I said about what Micah said about the support system, like you have so many family members that care about you that, we have a lot of support. So if anything happened to us, you wouldn't be with a stranger. You'd be with your aunt or your uncle or your grandma or your pop-up or, even friends, just so they didn't have that fear of what would happen
Unknown.
to them.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you can tell that they're thinking about it,
For sure.
So,
My kids have done the same. It's really hard.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a really helpful way to explain it. It's
Yeah.
helpful to me. Thank you.
Yeah, no. So, yeah, I think they just need to be able to be on board with that too. And even now, we still see his biological parents here and there, and our whole family goes, and they just know them as, Levi's biological mom and dad, and it's no negative or, and any feeling towards them that's negative. It's just, they know that's just the makeup of our family. So I think that that's really important. And then, I remember too, like one of my friends was saying to us, we were thanking them for like snacks or a meal, and they're like, "Oh, it's nothing. It's just a meal." And you're like, and I was like, "But all of you gave us a meal, and do you know how important that is? Like this one meal might not seem like much to you, but for us, it saves us time and energy, and you've been praying for us all this time." And so, I think people underestimate the value of their support, and how each one piece makes a whole bucket full of support for us, and how important that is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like a lot to them, but it really is. So, yeah. But yeah, it's hard for them to see the whole big picture, I think, from our perspective. But we are just overwhelmed with gratitude. And we have that. I think what Cindy said too, to set up like an email list every month that we can send out, was so helpful, because when you're trying to keep up with what you told one person and what you didn't tell the other person, and have to go through the same emotional like tale over and over again, it was nice to just have, okay, every month we're going to send out what's updated, and if there's something in between that's really important, we can send that out, and everyone's on the same page, whether they live 3 hours away or they're like next door, and they were all like on board with what we were processing. So that really helped us too, I think.
That's great. Yeah, really, really helpful practical tips as well. And as you think about your journey, what advice would you give our listeners as they're contemplating foster care and adoption is for them? What advice would you point them to that you've learned along the way?
Well, I think for us too, we didn't even get into, like with Levi, he had a lot of medical concerns, and for me, that was something I had checkmarked, like, I don't think I can do this, I limited, what we were willing to accept. I was hoping it wouldn't be a lot of visits, or I was hoping we know right away. And I feel like I tried to, even though I gave up some control with pursuing foster care, I was still trying to control what I thought I was capable of. And I think part of what we learned too, or advice, is to just trust God. If he's calling you to take a leap of faith, take it and see where it leads you, because he's going to be the one to step in and grow you, and you can't anticipate what that will look like. And for us, I would have said no to almost everything that we ended up doing with Levi, and then I would have missed out on our family now, and that would have been, awful. So I feel like it was a blessing that I didn't know everything at that time, and I was able to take a step of faith with Mike along the way every time, because God was growing us in ways that we didn't comprehend. And then now we are able to be a family that I didn't picture that we would be able to. I never pictured that I'd be able to be a special needs mom. I knew Mike could do it, but I didn't think I could do it. Or that, I'd be able to do the visits back and forth, but I felt like everything I said no to, God said yes to. And so it brought us Levi, and Levi is what our family needs. And I was worried about our older kids with that. He was diagnosed with autism after adoption, and I was worried about how something like that would affect my older kids, and they've been great. Like, I just picture the worst case scenarios, and it's not like that at all.
Yeah. I think it's been amazing to see like the whole way through our journey, just like each new thing that comes up or each, change in situation, like, God is always there. And so he's, provided for us. He's, made ways for our family to be able to, get through all these different things that we've been able to get through. And so I think that, a lot of times we can, maybe look at that big picture and say, can I do this or can't I do this? Like, and we might miss out by just like taking those small little steps along the journey where God is with you each step of the way, and, not limiting and what kind of he can do in your life and your family's life, I think is something that we have learned, and I think has been really helpful to us.
Yeah. So, I would definitely say pray and just listen and be mindful of the people around you. It might be just taking a step of, involving in a ministry that already exists and seeing how you can help support someone else that maybe in your community or your church, or it could just be taking the next step of learning about something that you didn't see before and you just want to find out more. It could be that God is calling you to do something big, and just taking that time to stop and pray and to listen. And I feel like when you hear it,
Yep.
So, yeah.
I love that. And one of the things you said in a pre-production conversation was, if God speaks to you, listen to that. Don't be afraid. And I think that's really helpful. And the other thing you just said, Mike, there about just taking the next step. And I do think people take it to the extreme and then they get scared away.
Yeah.
And as you both were just reflecting on the impact on your kids, all of them, that you do go to the worst, right? We often go to the worst, but I have seen in my own kids welcoming them in. I know Nate is a different person because of his own family's journey, that like I've seen my kids and even Katie and I grow so immensely. And I see my kids self-identify as helpers, and their selfishness is still there. Like it is for them, but it's less. And they actually do better, I think, when we have other kids, because they want to be helpers, because that's who they are in their character. That's who God is making in them. And so we get to see them grow in who God desires them to be as well. That it's not our job to prevent them and keep them safe. It's our job to usher them into who God wants them to be. And our obedience necessitates or allows that to happen. Our disobedience, when God asks us to do something and in the name of protection we don't do it, we actually stunt the gospel and the development and the sanctification in ourselves and our kids. So that's something that resonates deeply with our experience as a family as well. So, Nate, what are the takeaways? We always do these takeaways of things that we've learned, and then we will do that, and then also give you a chance. Anything else you want to say? But Nate, what are some of the takeaways that you're taking from this conversation?
I have two. So
I always say one, and he says two or three. So
sorry.
Two, perfect.
Sorry, I just get
Great,
excited. Man. They're great. Everything you guys had to offer is great. The first thing was you were talking about support teams, and you were saying that people underestimate the power of what they have to offer. And just whatever you have to offer to support families in your community, in your church, wherever, as long as it's helpful, is needed and is really a blessing. And so don't think of what you have as, it's not enough. It's not enough as, I can't give them everything, but your contribution plus other people's contributions can be everything, and can be everything that they need. And then the other one was, I'm just amazed at your guys' story and where God has empowered you in ways that you never thought like that you would be, like in places, taking you to places you never thought you would be, and He has taught you things through that. That's so encouraging, and I think speaks volumes even beyond foster care, just of being able to follow God, but especially in foster care, the courageousness that you guys took to take those steps, even when you were uncomfortable with, I don't know if, I've never seen myself as a special needs mom. I've never seen, not sure if we can do this. I've seen my parents do it, but I don't know if we could do it, and God provided. He gave you everything you needed. And so we're so thankful to have you on our podcast with just hearing how faithful you guys have been to follow the Lord's calling on your life, and that God showed up in a lot of really cool ways. So,
amen.
What is your takeaway, Sir Ryan?
I've got one. There's lots there, but I think I'm going to be thinking about the bird analogy, because it not only is good for age appropriate concept for our kids to understand, but it's just really good for me. Like it's personally nurturing as I think about like the kids who have come through my home, and some of them I don't get to know what happened to them next, but God knows, and He knows the birds by, He knows them, He made them, and He knows where they are, and He knows what they're going through, and He's going to provide for them. And, when Jesus says that we don't need to worry about what we wear or where we sleep, like, do I not care for the birds? Like, it's such a beautiful imagery to help me personally to remember that as kids come or they go, God knows who they are and knows where they are and is with them and watching over them wherever they go. That's just really, personally, if you can't see me, I'm tearing up a little bit.
It was moving.
It's really, it's really helpful to me to reconcile some of the kids that we've had to say goodbye to. And I wonder where they are. So that's really, really helpful. So thank you. Anything else you want to say that you didn't get to say? No pressure to do so.
Well, I have to give credit to my friend when we went to paint. It was like one of those, painting days, and she didn't want to put birds on hers because she didn't know how many kids she would have. And I was like, I'm just going to put our 2. And then I was like, we can always add more. And so that made me think about it. I wouldn't have thought about it if she hadn't even thought of it, So it's really, I have to give credit to her. But the other thing, I don't know, I just wanted to share too that we still, like, just because we did this foster care and then we adopted, we're still not sure what's the future for us too. And we've had experiences where we had, our oldest son's friend was in foster care with us for a temporary time that we would have never said yes to, but it was the circumstances surrounding it that just seemed all God. And then another circumstance where we thought we would have, it was like Levi's half brother, where we would have thought earlier we would have said yes, and then we knew it was not the right time. So it doesn't, I know it doesn't always look the same what God is calling you to do.
Yeah.
And we know it's fluid. And I've always said just one, and Mike's always like, well, let's hear what God says, And so I think for us too, it's something that we need to be open to always in the future, and just to hearing Him as well,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just wanted to add that. But
this has been so helpful, and there are kids in our area. We've been focusing, as you know, on Cumberland, Dauphin, Perry, and York, and there are kids in the foster care system who the rights of parents have been terminated or are likely to be, and need a place to be forever. They need a forever home. And so as you pray about what you've heard, maybe this is your next step. But as Karen and Mike have just so wisely said, just listen to the Lord and wait on the Lord and obey. And that will be different for each person. And the question isn't, as we continue to explore in this podcast, the question isn't, should I help with foster care? It's how should I do it? How should I step in? Because as we have said and will continue to say in James 1:27, when it says true and faultless religion is this, ready for it, here it comes. There's so few times where God's word is so clear that we need to look after widows and orphans in their distress and keep oneself pure and holy before the Lord. And so how can we step into this? And adoption is one of those ways. As we think about what happens to kids after foster care, adoption is one of those ways. And another one is there are some kids that aren't adopted and continue in the foster care system for a variety of ways. I mean, for a variety of reasons. And then they age out. And so our next section in this, we're going to interview someone who's going to help us understand what happens to kids after they age out of foster care. So, but again, today, thanks so much, Mike and Karen. We're really grateful for you. And may God bless you and your family in the days ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.